Now I will be talking about Dublin Core, which is the most important metadata schema. So it is Dublin Core Metadata Initiative, which is DCMI, responsible for maintenance of the Dublin Core metadata schema. The objectives of DCMI is create core set of metadata elements for cross-domain resource discovery, provide common descriptors across various disciplines. So this is also one of the important objectives of DCMI. Dublin Core can be used for electronic as well as physical objects. So that means though we have been using Dublin Core, or it is mostly being used in the context of digital repositories, but Dublin Core can as well be used to describe any physical object or any event or person or institution, anything. Okay. So in case of physical objects, of course, the other examples of exhibits in a museum or a computer or anything can be described using the Dublin Core, because basically it is a descriptive metadata schema. Now, so using Dublin Core, one can use in two ways. One is in the context of HTML. That means if you have already HTML pages, you can incorporate Dublin Core in the HTML documents, but mostly Dublin Core is expressed in extensible markup language, that is XML, which is a structured record. It's a tag code, okay, like HTML, but more in HTML there are fixed fields or elements defined. In XML, as the very name suggests, extensible markup means one can extend the elements in any schema as they wish. But the problem is many people may define their own elements. Finally, we may lose standards. That is where standards come into picture. So that if everybody follows the same standard, metadata exchange is facilitated. That is very important, because everybody cannot create their own ivory towers, because XML allows to do so. So it has the freedom, and at the same time it has the a caveat not to define your own metadata elements too extensively. HTML, of course, many of you must have known it has a fixed tags, and in fact HTML thus far mostly used for I call it a word processor of the web pages. So much of its tags or elements are meant for how to present certain words in a different color or different size, and how to format into bullets or tables. So much of the word processing, though not as powerful as regular word processors, but a basic word processing tags are provided in HTML. But the challenge is whether it can be used to describe or incorporate metadata elements in HTML. So that is exactly what we are going to briefly touch upon. But again, as I told, in DSpace and in OAI PMH and other places, mostly Dublin Core is expressed in XML format. So Dublin Core, let us look into the structure of the Dublin Core. It has elements, it has qualifiers, and it has DCMI type. So the qualifiers make the Dublin Core transformed into qualified Dublin Core, that is QDC, commonly known as. Otherwise, simple Dublin Core has only metadata elements, no qualifiers to it. Whereas qualifiers talk about an element refinement and encoding schema. Now, plain Dublin Core is W3C recommended, and whereas qualified Dublin Core is more granular and expressive, DSpace follows qualified Dublin Core with modifications, but however, you can expose the metadata through OAI PMH for data exchange in plain DC. So, of the two flavors of Dublin core, we have plain Dublin core and we have qualified Dublin core, and the DSpace for data entry, a modified form of Dublin core. For exposing metadata, you can expose metadata through OAI PMH either in QDC or in plain DC. Of course, it allows other metadata schema like DIDL, RDF, then mods and other things. Now, the basic DC elements are contributor, coverage, creator, date, description, format, language, publisher, relations, right, source, subject, title and type. We will explain what these elements down the other slides. Let us talk about the DC qualifiers before we try to enumerate each of those elements like contributor and creator and other things. What exactly qualifiers mean? In qualifiers in DC are two kinds. One is element refinement, another is encoding schema. Okay. Note, DC elements can be used without qualifiers. Qualifiers are used to narrow the scope of an element. For example, if you have name of a person, if you want to further refine or make it more granular, you can divide the name of the person into last name, first name and middle name. Then it becomes, they become qualifiers to it. In general, in good old days, we used to call it subfields or sub-elements in this context. So, element refinement, they share the same meaning, okay, with the element, but are more restricted in scope. Just as in the example name, okay, so whether middle name or last name or first name, they share the same meaning, okay, it is the meaning of in the name of a person. But first name talks about only the given name of the person, whereas the last name talks about the family name of the person. This is what we mean by element refinement, or adding qualifiers to the elements to get a kind of sub elements to it. So, or otherwise you can have alternative title. That is, alternative title means the title of a document is, we know. Alternative element, title could be a translated title or abbreviated title or transliterated into another language, like that could be an alternative to the alternative title. Encoding scheme. So, sometimes we have to specify what kind of a schemes we are following in order to extract the data and represent the data in a particular element. So, it provides contextual information or parsing rules that aid in the interpretation of a term value. For example, controlled vocabularies, okay, formal notations or parsing rules. So, in case of subject descriptors, we can pick up the subject descriptor from Library of Congress subject headings, in which case we can mention the scheme that is followed is LCSH or some other word, and we say it is mesh subject heading, or for example, in case of agricultural, this one we can say it is an AgriVoc subject heading, or Commonwealth Agricultural Bureau CAB subject heading. So, syntax of the encoding schemes is defined in W3C DTF. So, DCMI vocabulary type. So, we have what kind of the vocabulary are there, especially this is related to the object, what kind of object you are describing. As I told, the Dublin core could be used not only for electronic documents, it can be used for physical objects also. Okay. So, you can see that it can be used for a collection. So, for example, when you are describing, then we have to tell the DCMI type is it is a collection or it is a data set. It could be an event. As I told, in future semantic web technologies, probably we require metadata for events. You can see in the second column services, okay, processes. Like that we can have images, okay, or interactive resource, moving image, physical object, service, software, sound, still image, text. These are the DCMI identified types, and in one of the metadata elements we have to mention what exactly the type of document or resource we are describing. So, let us go into each of the Dublin Core elements that are described, I mean those 15 elements, and we will see whether they have any element refinement or whether some elements have a metadata schema. Title, the name given to a resource. Okay. Of course, this is generally understood in case of titles of documents, we say it is a title of the document. Element refinement is alternative title. One can use even abbreviated title or translated title. For example, one can say that this is an abbreviation of say IEEE Journal of some robotics or something like that. So, instead of expanding entire IEEE or something like ACM, okay, Journal of ACM or JSEM you can mention, and so that could be alternative title. Then encoding schema, there is no encoding schema in this case. That means we have an element refinement called alternative title for the element title, but it does not have any kind of encoding schema. Normally it is represented as given in the examples, but again we do not have to define how it should be represented. Normally the software takes care of how do we internally represent the data in each of these elements. For example, in DSpace you will only see a kind of a template for author or title wherein we enter the title. Finally, it will be stored in a database, and when it is exchanged through OAI PMH, probably the software, one of the modules of DSpace will take care of adding XML structure to the data. So, here you can see DC title value is picture of Dorian Gray, and another example could be American Meteorological Association newsletter. The alternative title could be AMA newsletter, which is nothing but an abbreviated title of the same American Meteorological Association newsletter. The creator, an entity primarily responsible for making the content of the resource. That means he is the primary responsibility of the document or the digital object. So, obviously it does not have any element refinements and it does not have any encoding schema. So, you can see that DC creator value Swift Jonathan, and another example could be Library of Congress, or yet another example could be Library of Congress cataloging division. That means of course we are representing the cataloging division of the Library of Congress. Here I would like to mention, in the earlier versions of DSpace, instead of using creator for data entry, they were using contributor author, which latter created problems because normally everybody uses creator, because contributor is used in the context of who has secondary responsibility, not primary responsibility. So, we always believe creator is the primary responsibility of the digital object. So, any of the element refinement that occurs under contributor are only secondary ones, like editor, illustrator and other things are contributors, but they are not creators. Then subject, the topic of the content of the resource. Element refinement, none, but there are lots of encoding schema. So, encoding schema could be Library of Congress subject headings or medical subject headings or Dewey Decimal Classification or universal decimal classification or Library of Congress classification. That means when we enter the subject, we have to mention I have picked up the subject term from mesh thesaurus. So that is what I have to say. Then actually the data may be carcinoma, but element refinement, encoding schema suggests that it is a mesh subject heading. So is the case. I may pick up the value as 2001.23, which represents the subject of the document, but again the actual value 2001.23 is from Dewey Decimal Classification. Description: an account of the content of the resource. That means it is an elaborate description about the actual digital object. It could be either abstract or table of contents. That means the element refinement suggests the description can be further subdivided into sub-elements like abstract and table of contents. Then encoding schema, URI, Universal Resource Identifier. Okay. For example, if you take the example, you can see that the description is abstract, where we mention that the author presents a tutorial introduction, blah 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 blah, like that. Or otherwise he can also represent the entire table of contents, okay, where the value could be introduction, some vertebrates, invertebrates, like that. He can go on listing out the content page of any document. So description covers two major things, either an abstract or it could be table of contents. If one wishes, of course, they can have both, because many of the Dublin core elements are typically repeatable. We know that in case of authors there can be any number of authors. So this is a repeatable field, and perhaps title is the only one of the very few which has which is not a repeatable field. Maybe data publication also not repeatable, but DOI and URIs, all these are repeatable. Now, publisher, an entity responsible for making the resource available. So it doesn't have any elements, refinements, and it also doesn't have any encoding scheme. So you can see the examples. Publisher, the value is MIT Press. In another case, we can see another example, Dell Computers as the publisher. Contributor, okay, this is the one which one has to be careful to distinguish between creator and contributor. An entity responsible for making the contributions to the content of the resource. So he only contributes, but not he is the primary responsibility. This is the major distinction between a creator and a contributor. Element refinement, none, but usually local extension is used to determine the role of the contributor to the contents of the resource, like artist, editor, illustrator, like this. Okay, but as such contributor doesn't have any refinement, but in DSpace of course has taken the liberty to add guide as a research guide as a contributor. Of course you can mention whether research guide or a supervisor, because as such Dublin core, qualified Dublin core did not enumerate what are the element refinements for the contributor. So here one has to be careful whether they are deviating too much from the schema. But again, in ETDMS or other schema for electronic thesis and dissertations, contributor is definitely used, and if one follows that standard like ETDMS or UK ETD, they can borrow the exact terminology that is being used for the research guide. So date is really complex in the sense it has lots of element refinements. Okay, in plain Dublin core, date doesn't really get expanded to too many things. it is a simple date of publication rather. But if we want to have or rather achieve more refinement in qualified Dublin core, we have various kinds of dates, that is date available, date of copyright, date created, date issued, date submitted to the repository, valid date, date accepted, date modified. So many dates are there. And again, another issue with regard to date is the encoding schema. How do you enter the date is the question. So if you follow the ISO 8601 standard or W3C date format standard, one has to enter year hyphen month hyphen actual date. So you can see that in the examples you have DC date created value is 1990 05/14, that is May 14th. Or sometimes you may mention only the up to the month, but again you have to say that what schema you have followed, because after all for date has both refinement and encoding schema. So W3C DTF schema where you have entered just date or date and month. So that's why DSpace, when it is exposing metadata over QDC, correctly represents with a lot of inventory refinements, and you can see the distinguished one date from the other. But unfortunately, when it is exposed with plain Dublin core, all these dates get merged into one. So you see in the output date, some half a dozen dates without enumerating what exactly each date stands for, as in the case of the qualified Dublin core, like date created or issued or submitted. This kind of refinement would not appear in plain Dublin core. So type, actually we have already dealt with the DCMI type. So in the element type, naturally we have to pick up one of the DCMI types as the actual data. So the nature or genre of the content of the resource. So what type of a document or a digital object you are describing is enumerated. I mean, it is the information about it is given in under the element type. So obviously the encoding schema is DCMI type. So if you look at the examples, it will have one of the values mentioned in DCMI type in the earlier slides. So DC type scheme is DCMI type, that is value is dataset. So here also the scheme is DCMI type and actual value is software. You know that it can have anything, service or physical object. Many DCMI types are enumerated in the earlier slide. Then format, the physical or digital manifestation of the resource. So it has two refinements, format extent and format medium. So format extent talks about size or duration of the resource. For example, in case of a plain PDF or an image, format extent talks about what is the size of the image file or the PDF file or any file size. But in case of for example video documents, it may talk about the duration of the resource. That means whether the video or the movie runs for 2 hours or 1.5 hours, they give the duration. So this is about extension, that is extension and duration of the resource. Then the medium, of course, and what medium it is the recorded, like whether it is on a CD-ROM or some other medium. So you can see that in the examples, schema is IMT, okay, then value is text XML, then here the medium is CD-ROM. In another case, extent is about 14 minutes. Another case, extent, that is the size of the document, is 856 kilobytes. Identifier, this is very essential, especially when you are aggregating metadata from various repositories and providing a service, because when the end user clicks, it is the identifier which takes him to the original document. So, it could be DOI or a CNRI handle, an unambiguous reference to the resource within a given context, which uniquely identifies a particular digital object. So, element refinement, of course, bibliographic citation. So, encoding schema, it could be ISBN, ISNMN, ISSN or URI, anything could be the identifier. Okay. So, you can see the value scheme is URI, value is some http www.google.com, something like that. And ISBN, of course, if you enter, you can enter the value of the ISBN. Source, a reference to the source from which the present source is derived. So, element refinement is none, but encoding schema URI, SCI, ISBN, ISSN like that. So, you can see images from page 54 of 1978 edition of Bernard Shaw's Saint John, that is the actual source. Then in another case it could be just a URI. Language of the document, of course encoding schema you can follow either ISO 639-2 or request for comments RFC 3066. So, you can see the examples that language value primarily English with abstracts also in French. Relation, this is the one which relates your digital resource with another resource in the same repository or somewhere else on the net. So, element refinement, of course, you have scores of relations like is format of, is part of, has part of and is version of, like that. We have various relations identified with other documents. So, you can see encoding schema, again URI, SCI and all this, that is you can see the examples. Relation, it is based on the value Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Another way the relation is actually a URI. So, coverage, what is the coverage? We have two aspects of coverage, one is spatial, another is temporal. So, one talks about the place aspect of it, another is the time aspect of it, and in both the cases we have schema which tells that if you are following spatial, you can mention you are following DCMI point or ISO 3166, or in case of temporal ones you can say DTF. So, rights also, who element refinement is access rights, who has license agreements and other things you can have. So, the conclusion is DSpace uses a modified version of Dublin Core. However, one can adopt their choice of metadata scheme like UK ETDMS. Metadata elements can be added to suit local needs, but it would mean deviating from the DC standard. So, this one has to be careful. With that we conclude.